Okay, welcome back. Thank you for joining me in this session. First of all, while I'm very inviting and I like people to come and to join this lecture, yesterday night I looked at the number of people that signed up, that are approved for the course, and my mind went from excited to outright scared. So because we never, I don't think we have 30 people in this course, so it will be an interesting one. So it will be requiring some adjustments with respect to scalability, so we get everyone opportunity to talk to everyone, which will be challenging. Anyway, but before we do this later on, because that will be one of the final tasks for today, so someone needs to keep track of the time in case I overrun, because I'll probably be slightly too excited when I talk about some topics. But first of all, we want to get a baseline. What are serious games, and what is, we talked a bit about what the course is about last week. The fact that it's not introduction to serious games, but introduction to research in serious games, right? You guys need to do something research related. So anyone who feels like, oh, I'm sitting here and will develop games, don't be, because sure, we can frame it this way, but most likely that's not the case. But today, rather, we want to talk about what serious games actually are and what they are made for. We heard some opinions on this one last time, but what are serious games in your view? It's fuzzy, I promise you. Some of you, yeah?
A game for educational purposes.
Yeah. And what is it not made for? That's usually a more decisive part.
It's not made for entertainment.
It's not primarily made for entertainment, right? So entertainment as a means to an end, right? So idea, sure, it's a game, want to entertain people, but it's not the main purpose of the game, right? So, and as you may imagine, I'm not sure if you're reflecting about games just now. To some extent, all games have some sort of purpose that may not necessarily only be entertainment, right? So whenever you do something, you develop a certain skill, right? If you play Candy Crush, right? So of course, evidently I'm not sure if it's a serious game. Anyone? Not really. That's primarily entertainment. But nevertheless, you learn something, right? So in worst case, you learn the game. In worst case, you become really efficient and you get that stuff done. And if you can't, you use some in-game currency and solve that thing this way. So there are other means of gaming the system. So to some extent, you learn something about the game specifically. But the idea is here to learn something about other than the game itself, right? Something that translates into the real world, right? So it has an interface to real world needs and opportunities. So if we look back, how old do you think serious games are? 2 years? More than that, right?
Maybe 50 years.
50 years, yeah. Also
computer
good.
games, if we consider computer games.
Let's do it broad, right? Computers are just a tech, means to an end, right? We talk about games as a mean for excitement. So, but yeah, okay, 50 years the house, that's an interesting number. So, so you're considering games before computer games? Cool, well done. Anyone else? That's that? No, it's not.
I was thinking Microsoft had something in the 90s.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the name. It was kind of like was it Microsoft House or something? I don't remember what it's called. But they had like some interactive software kind of thing.
Right. I think okay, that's off track. But if I recall, before they had Microsoft Office, they had something like a organization mechanism for your office. So you had a visual representation of your office with a. I need to dig this thing out. But the idea was basically there. Can you use the metaphors of your personal office or workplace office to organize your things, documents, calendar, and so on. I think that's what you're alluding to. I'm not sure if it's a serious games or actually meant to be a productivity application, but from now this perspective, I agree with you. It most certainly would have been a game. I tried to dig that out and show you a screenshot of this one. It's quite funny actually. Right, 50 years. Who gives me more? Anyone else? Any guesses? Or any instances of a game you consider serious? Please don't leave me. Okay.
We need more chairs. Any chairs and
Cool, do it. Sounds good. Desperate, am I? Desperate for attention. But any other games you have in mind? Yes. Oregon Girl Tale. Any story about this? In fact, if you don't have, I have.
I haven't played it, so.
No, me neither. So it well precedes my. But I think there's a modern remake of this one, right? Various uptakes of it. Did you play Oregon Trail? Yeah?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Yeah, okay. And, yeah?
It's on archive.io, I think. Oregon Trail.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
We had Math Circus growing up.
Math Circus?
Yeah.
Help me out here, what's that?
It was a computer game meant to be engaging for kids to help them learn math, and it had horrible sound effects that went with it.
But did it work?
I think so.
Okay.
There was one was for typing and one was for mathematics, but those were like
Right.
early 2000s.
And they were used in a school setting?
Yeah.
Was it here in Norway or?
Canada.
In Canada. Okay, interesting. I haven't heard about it. Probably worthwhile picking this up. In case anyone wants to do the education track, probably worthwhile looking at those games. It would be interesting to see how young or old this is. I will not need this chair, I promise you. So you can throw dice or something and figure out who gets it. Or one gets the first 45 minutes, the other one the second. Anyway. All right, let's not push it further. I think one of the first, point is the idea of serious games is quite fuzzy, right? So sometimes we don't quite know, is it a serious game or is it actually an application or is it only a game? A reference to the probably oldest one that I found was the Mancala type games. Who knows those? Is anyone acquainted with those games? It's an interesting one because they're very cross-cultural exercise looking at those games. Now I know. So basically they're inspired by the idea of sowing seeds and harvesting and so on, right? Farming activities and surprise, surprise, 1400 BC, so quite some time ago. And the idea is basically quite simple, that you are having this a kind of an symmetric concept, shape, whatever else, and you're systematically sowing your seeds, and the idea is it varies over different game times, but the point is there, if you run out of certain seeds or you're not able to populate your the host, accordingly you eventually lose the game, but there are also mitigations of certain conditions under which you can take your component seeds and so on. So basically the idea is who has the most seeds in the end, right? So that's the kind of metaphor applied here. And the idea there is that you learn something about accounting to some extent, right? How you distribute seeds, how you manage them well and so on. Is there anything more you know about this game? No. It's kind of really, point is there are massive amount of variants, European variants, so originally from the Arabic area, peninsula, but there are Southeast Asian variants of it and so on. So it's not Mancala, it's not the name of the game, it's the type of the game. They usually have other names attached to it. So if you look into your own history, you may well encounter one of those games. Please.
Could chess be considered a serious game?
What do you think? You put a question out, right?
Well, I think yes, as it sort of boils down to reading.
Yeah, exactly, right? So that could be an angle you take, right? But it could also just be, isn't it a matter a bit of the attitude? I mean, if you're sitting there, you're well acquainted with resource management, then it's just a pastime, right? So it could be just a leisure activity, right? But fundamentally, I think that's the motivation seen here for this game. That's why it's referred to as serious game, right? But of course, I haven't found the Arabic word for serious game, so I don't really know whether that actually was characterized as such at that time. Obviously, it wasn't. First reference to serious games was in 1970, more recent version 1975, by Abt, and it basically suggests that a game that has a different purpose but focusing on amusement is considered serious games. It has some sort of educational benefit or hopefully outcome. So this is kind of the standard definition we find. I don't know. I mean, it's so broad and so on. I wouldn't suggest that's all you need to know about the course, but that's the starting point. And if you know this, you'll probably know more than necessary. But looking at looking beyond the historical perspective on serious games, and at the more recent one, we end up at some stage in the computational area, and it was indeed Oregon Trail you just mentioned, which is probably one of the early representatives of serious games, meaning serious games that actually make the intent, right, to be a serious game. And that's quite a funny one. The Oregon Trail, what's the storyline? The Oregon Trail? Or anyone really? It's an open question, if anyone knows. Please.
Well, it's to try to complete this Oregon Trail, which is a famous travel route going from the east coast of America to the west.
Yeah, that's right. So exactly. So the purpose was primarily, okay, how can we teach kids history, right? I mean, if you take the perspective of a 9-year-old and so on, put yourself back in your past, how interested were you in history? Who says yes? On the scale of 1 to 5, I was a 5. I was really interested in history. Oh, really? Cool. Yeah, 2. Okay, 2 out of 30. That makes 1/15. Okay, 3. Yeah, okay, 10%. That's pretty good. Yeah. Who said he has no interest in history at that time anyway, irrespective of today? Okay. Okay, the rest I assume lays in the middle. I will not iterate through the entire histogram here, but we got a feel, right? So the point is basically, how do you make I think early secondary school kids excited about learning about their own history, and American history is fundamentally attached with the grand tours from the east to west, the exploration and so on. So this game was actually purpose made for this, right? Originally developed in 1971, but then promoted and produced only in 1975. You can see the 4 years gap that someone could imagine or afford at that time. If you imagine you're developing a game nowadays, and only publishing it 4 years later, well, good luck with that strategy. I don't think that will pay off anymore, right? So it's kind of interesting phenomenon there as well. But it was fundamentally made with public funding, and the idea was there that you can basically progress through this entire trail and have certain decisions you need to make, right? So I think this is quite fun here. So if you read through this like a transcript a bit, Monday, May 10th, 1847, right? So your total mileage is so and so, and this is your resource overview. You have so and so much food, bullets, clothing, miscellaneous supply, and cash left, right? And what do you want to do? Decisions, right? That's where the game comes in. Do you want to stop at the next fort, hunt, or continue? Right, and then it's the prompts asking, okay, what do you want to choose? I'm not sure if you played those kind of games, but basically you take one of those choices. Person evidently chose 2, and it asks you to type bang, quite literally, and then by whatever means and way it says, oh yeah, right between the eyes you got the big one, meaning your hunting was successful, right? So that's the kind of that's how you would play this game, kind of interactively using a Taylor printer. At that time, there was no expectation of having a UI or whatever else, right? But it was kind of I think sparking imagination mostly, right? So, but using this in a computational sense. 1985, they put some UI to it, so it got a bit more exciting, or something relatable, and you probably get closer to those text-based adventures you may have seen in the past. If you ever played Monkey Island or any of those ones, don't know. Evidently, yes, cool, yes. Not totally alone here. All right, so. Another serious game, I will not run through the whole history, but certain samples, especially early ones, to give a feel how young or old or how fuzzy this area is Battlezone. Developed by Atari. And the idea is that you're kind of a tank commander. So that is where it becomes flaky with respect to serious games. But the idea is that you're some tank commander. This is kind of the arcade setup. You would have found this in arcades. And it was primarily actually meant for entertainment. Until US Army figured that out, that it could be actually quite useful for their purpose. So they developed a derivative as shown down here. And that's called Army Battle Tank Army Battlezone, sorry, as far as I understand. So this is how an entertainment game has turned into a training game to some extent. Kind of a well-known example in this direction. So it's always about the perspective you have on it, right? It could well be entertainment, but it depends on how you use it, right? So it's a set of different games over time. Those early ping pong games, for example, Battlezone and Bradley Trail is the same thing. That's the Army version here, basically. And so on more recent ones, America's Army, we'll get back to that game, very exciting one. Will be something you may want to review. I will point you to that later for particular reasons. And more recently, more realism games here, for example, X-Plane 10, what is that? Does anyone know what this is? No one into flight simulators?
I was going to say flight simulator.
Yes.
The ride.
Yeah. So it's a very, very very well developed flight simulator that particularly focused on realism. So the intent is really to provide actually flight training. It's not just so much entertainment like some other simulators, but the focus is on realism there. So that's a rundown basically here. Reference to this paper is also linked in our wiki. I encourage you to read this. This paper is quite interesting if you want to learn more about the history. But of course, this is also a possible special subject or topic that you want to talk about in front of the class. So I leave a bit of gap here on opportunity for you to explore. Okay, so serious games, what do we know? Well, first of all, they are not necessarily for amusement only. They're quite old. They can be online and offline. What I mean this way is they can be computationally supported. They can be actually online using internet facilities, but of course also be very old-fashioned paper or board-style games, right? Right. Okay, now if you want to generalize, you want to develop a serious games, what are the core ingredients? What are the aspects you want to consider when even attempting to develop a serious game? So today we're kind of trying to build up the infrastructure. What do you need for a serious game? Please.
What do you need to get out of it? I mean, goal or intent of it?
Goal or intent is good. Yeah. So you need to well, let's call it objective or something, right? So that could work. Yeah, an objective is always good.
It has to be entertaining.
Yeah, entertaining is also good. That's right. But does it have to be?
I would say engaging.
Engaging, right? So what's the difference?
Entertaining. Because we specified that serious games were not made necessarily primarily for entertainment, so you still need to engage the user to continue on the task.
That's right. So, yeah. So, no, it's nuanced. It's nuanced because, of course, you need to use kind of emotions associated with entertainment, right? So you want somebody to play that game to some extent. We'll talk about this. There's some limitations there, of course. But fundamentally, what you want to have is engagement, right? So it's nothing worse than having a serious game that's not played, right? So, or at least not taken serious. Cool. What else? I think I like those points already. Well, it was a try. Anyway, I give up. Any other points?
A platform that makes sense?
Platform. Good. Platform. So some sort of infrastructure. Yeah. What else? There was you were first, I believe.
You need to have some rules on how to play the game and also the reward system.
The second bit.
Reward system.
Good. Reward system. You don't need to be able to read it. It's mostly for me. There was this, you were next. You had a comment.
So
Then
one
I'll
of
come back to
the
you.
point that she said, reward system could also be some of the gamification elements that will motivate the users to attain or achieve that objective.
Mm-hmm.
Some gamification elements such as maybe progress or some.
Yeah. Great. You guys are ahead of me. That's brilliant. I didn't expect
Some kind of story around which the game will involve.
some storyline. Hang on. Any other points? Good. Because my board is fit. Engagement platform rules. Yeah, that's very nice actually. It's much better than my selection. Well, break it down, bring it back to the basics. We come back to that in a second, but fundamentally, the idea is that you need those three things, right? So, of course, this is all important, or in fact, that's quite central. But you guys are one step ahead. In fact, a few steps ahead. But fundamentally, in order to get serious again, this Hutch thing is a bit cheesy, but I couldn't resist. So, so we have theory on the one hand, some content, that's a substantive matter that you're interested. You train something, or how to, operate a tank. That's a bad example. How to learn maths, a much nicer example. Of course, what's the fundamental theory behind it, the dry stuff, and then how do you embed it, right? The game design. How do you translate it so it becomes useful? What do you need to consider when you think about game design?
Can represent whatever you want to learn.
Yeah. And if you look at all three of those, which ones do you think is the closest to the user?
Game design.
Yeah.
Because it would involve example, like how the characters would look, how the user would interact with the system, what would be the technical aspect that are directly related to the user.
Exactly, right? So this is kind of the front-facing part of your entire serious games, right? Here's all the magic, the theory. You know, if you're learning maths, of course, then you know Euclidean algebra or whatever else is embedded here, right? So that's fundamentally behind it. Content could be what specific exercises do you want to, for example, do, right? So which levels do we accommodate? And here's theory about matching, right? Matching all this stuff basically to an interface that corresponds to user. And it's also important that you know about the user at this stage, right? So if you are teaching in higher education, the serious game may well be slightly different compared to the Oregon Trail, which was targeted at secondary school students, right? So it's quite essential to bear in mind where we sit. So that's kind of the overarching theme. Again, your points are way better. We'll get to that in a second. But most of them actually refer to which of those three elements? Objective, engagement, platform, rules, motivation, mechanism, storyline. I think they're scared. No? Which ones do you refer to?
Game design.
All of them?
Except objective, that could go into theory or content maybe.
Yeah, content is probably a good one, right? So yeah, content is good mapping there, because theory is more like content would be, okay, what do I want to concrete get across, right? What's the theory I need to know to do that, right? So I have a certain, for example, I want to teach geometry. Well, you need to know the theory. But you don't necessarily want to teach the theory, but actually just an intuitive understanding. It depends, of course, right? If this is the focus, then it can be. But the objective can often be embedded in the content. Engagement. Your specialty. Where does it sit? Engagement.
Game design.
Ah, yes. Good. Platform.
Game design.
Also game design, right? So rules and reward. Ah,
Can be theory or content.
okay.
Game design.
Also game design. Good. Reward motivation. Exactly. And storyline then, yeah. So story, actually technically also, yes. Right? So there's a few, most of it sits actually.
It's
Bruno has
interesting
comment.
because theory, you can think of two types of theories. One is the theory of the subject matter, meaning what the game is all about.
Yeah.
But then you have the game design theory as well,
That's right.
and psychology theory, and the whole theory underlining the game design.
It
So
becomes messy, right?
yeah, it
Very
could be.
Yeah, I know that's not optimal. So that's why I have this slide, because I don't like it either. So, but come on, who wouldn't be? So fundamentally, this kind of to understand how this discipline comes about, how it comes together. So it's probably more important to look at the underlying disciplines that are involved to some extent, because it gives a better overview of where we end up. If you were to have talked to people a decade or so earlier, they may not necessarily identify serious games as something serious, but rather would be talking about game-based learning, I believe. You can fix anything I say at any time. But the idea is basically there that it's kind of an intersection of multiple different domains that are well established, have their own disciplinary traditions, their outlets, and so on. And that is, of course, primarily the learning aspect, the learning community, right? So pedagogy, how to teach to different communities, content you want to teach, and so on. Then there's simulation, which of course lends itself very well to computer games in the widest sense, right? So setting certain parameters, trying out, see what happens along those lines. And of course, and this is generally more associated with the training community. So the idea, of course, you find things like weather simulations and the like, but simulation here more in the sense of training, right? So operational training in that respect. On that note, I got in the introductory resources, there's a set of resources and videos and so on that shows certain examples, and I got sent another link to a training video settled in Norway. It's quite interesting about how to safely operate power lines, so safety, health and safety, I guess, when you operate and develop safety line, power grids and so on. So worthwhile looking at. It's just a small video you can look through. Anyway, that's also more on the simulation side there. And of course, then the games, right? The games really, that's shouldn't be done in universities, I think, right? So that's the kind of the attitude at that time that persisted. It's set a bit outside because it's purely for entertainment. And the question is here, which intersection of those, can we find, or what's the balance between those three elements to have an optimal learning outcome? That was basically the understanding. In some cases, we don't really have simulation components, in which case the idea is that the learning experience usually drifts more towards entertainment, more the amusement kind of approach, whereas the simulation makes things generally more serious because they're embedded in some sort of, it brings the game closer to the physical world. Usually it means a simulation of some sort of physical system.
Well, this is obviously published, but I will still argue that it would be better to say skill and drill instead of entertainment games, because if you have the skill and drill games, they tend to not have so much simulation. They just bang, 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 see what the skills and drills are, and that would be games and learning without being simulation. So.
Okay.
But for like the example that I gave with Math Circus, it was like a way to, it was a colorful, noisy way to get kids to pay attention to math rather than something else.
Right.
So I would say it would fit under that.
It would still fit under that, yeah. But it's not a simulation, right?
Yeah.
No, right, so, yeah. Okay, sure.
Typical skill and drill games, I think, would go into that area as well.
Skill and drill games.
If you learn to multiplication or...
Ah, right, sure, yes. Yeah, I could see that. I was thinking about military training or skill.
No.
Yeah. No, it's not exclusively. I mean, but the idea is that often there's a kind of physical simulation component embedded in it. But we get to another form of simulation as well in some future lecture I need to talk about. Please.
So you mentioned earlier virtual battle space, VBS.
Yeah.
The game is a simulation, but it's not used for simulation at all. In the way that they mostly train for encounters, like how to handle encounters, where the basics of shooting is not really what is the focus. So with that's kind of training still be a simulation. Or
Good one. Where would you see this? We have a simulation component. Do we have a training component? Do you see it there? Wouldn't it then just fit in this intersection to some extent? Being a trading game?
well, it's still a simulation in as a core, but that's not the focus as you.
No.
More experience.
But then you could differentiate, for example, having the infrastructure, which could be a simulation, for example, but actually the purpose of the game being more settled in terms of learning, right? Centered around learning. Oftentimes, simulation is really means to an end. I mean, where do you start and stop thinking about simulation? Simulation happens anytime you're doing a what-if analysis, right? So you're trying something out, get feedback. Well, that can be very short, a very immediate idea. For example, if you explore physics by throwing something and so on. So, but even if very simplistic conceptions of simulation, nevertheless there are. But of course, the focus of the game most certainly will drift into a different direction. In fact, there's next to always a simulation component in computer games, especially if there's probabilistic elements involved. So if you don't do anything with full certainty. So, but I'm not sure how contemporary this overview is. But in any case, those are considered the disciplinary traditions from which serious games stem, at least in the modern computer science curriculum way. So,
although you have to say that serious games for education. Because these circuits might be different if you had some other serious games for
That's
health or games.
Well, but it's not saying education, right? It's saying learning, right? So that's different because even in the health context, you learn something about this. What's the minimum? If you think about a health kind of game, what's the objectives generally if you have health games? Good prompter.
I think maybe like health promotion, like. For one of our classes, we made like games that would make them move.
Yeah.
Like for elderly and such.
Ah,
so
okay.
That's like a different purpose than learning.
Yeah.
I would still say it's a serious game.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. But don't you consider this to some extent could you see a relation to a learning process there?
I guess learning how to promote your health or like get a better health.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah, awareness, right? So sometimes you need to see, okay, what happens if I don't move, for example, right now, right? And you show some not so exciting news or whatever else, and then you have an awareness process setting in, right? So I mean, we'll see. You're spot on. I think it's a serious game, absolutely. But personally, I also think it has a learning component in there because we'll learn more about learning, or I think education in particular. I think in some of the future sessions, either 2 or 3 weeks from now, we'll see. Still need to negotiate. Runa will probably talk about, if he has the time, talk about a bit of education and learning principles, how we actually work as learners. So we have a bit of a broader perspective of what that hopefully means. So I don't interpret this strictly as education, but really as learning. In worst case,
but sometimes the games for health will sometimes be just to encourage more exercising, being active. And the may not be learning, it's just the fact that you will like people to be more active. So it's encourage you to be more active without necessarily a learning component to it. So.
Yeah.
Because you're learning the game, just learning the exercise. So.
Well, yeah. If learning is about permanent change of behavior,
there you go. Behavior change. I mean, child development, that's the obvious objective you have, right? So you're reinforcing something and hope for behavior change. Consider that learning, but you can't really ask them, what did you learn, right? So because it's not like a cognitive task generally or an explicit something they can explicate, but rather internalize, right? So, but this behavior change is also a learning process to understand, for good and bad, I guess. Good and bad, we come back to that as well later. Cool. Anyway, I think we come back to learning at some stage. So. Some points about serious games. Why, looking at education, if you want to go down the education route, what's the particular benefit of using serious games for educational purposes? Can you see any reason why they could be useful?
You can get much quicker down to what you want to learn.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I follow.
If you have roles that don't really get to train, in my background, it's you have first responders or first responder leaders who don't really get to train much because there's not any large-scale accidents happening all the time.
Right.
So you could get simulate those kind of roles.
Right.
Much faster than having full-scale exercise.
Yeah, or waiting for it. Yeah. So and getting it wrong mostly. Yeah, that's good. So it's kind of this kind of trial and error component to it, right? And the planability. Yeah. What other aspects?
My girlfriend is a teacher in elementary school.
Yeah.
And they have a game which all the kids play together, and they create their avatar and travel to different planets. And each planet might be about math or history, and they solve objectives together on those planets, and their characters progress in some way. So at that age, elementary school, I think it's a lot more engaging for them rather than a traditional textbook.
Yeah. So you're inviting the audience. That is good. Can they, just since you know the game, can they play it at home as well?
I don't think so.
Right. So it's confined to the classroom setting. Okay. Yeah.
I can't quite remember exactly what type of school it was, but I know that it was like a videregående college in Norway, where some students who did like some sort of like building course learned building through Minecraft. Their teacher set up a server with like lots of stuff, and they had to like build it on Minecraft in accurate proportions and everything. So that engaged the student a lot.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yes.
And that's like high school students, so that's
right.
It's not just for kids.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Minecraft is has been a serious has become a serious game/tool, I guess. Yes, in many ways. Good point. Very good point. What are other advantages? So what is a lot harder? So 30 people, right? So I want to teach you something, right? So what's a lot harder for me to do here in a classroom setting than via a serious game? Or what is possibly harder if you had a serious game? Think about all the content that we talk about. Okay, it's not the classical, teaching from teaching in the first place, but what are the other advantages that the serious games could offer you that a single, teacher can't? At least not on site, please.
The content's been standardized
Yes, right? Standardized to what?
To the designer's setting.
In this case,
Yeah.
my setting, right? So that's correct. So number one, I'm designing it to some extent, through my own lens, right? So I'm biased. And whom do I design it for? I'm lucky you didn't figure that out. Yeah, that's good. Well, kind of the prototypical, and you design people know this, typical persona of a originally Mac student, actually, right? So that's where we're or master student in the widest sense. But necessarily not you individually, right? So you have diverse backgrounds. So our Mac students could come from our own degree bachelor in programming here in Gjøvik, but most of you don't, right? So you come from elsewhere. But I cannot accommodate, integrate all those different perspectives. With the serious games, there would be the opportunity to actually customize it more, right? What's your background? What are you interested in, right? So what's your perspective on serious game? And then you can accommodate and adjust this accordingly, right? So you have a much more opportunity to adapt to the player background, right? Or interests, of course, right?
Although an intelligent tutoring system will do the same thing. It will target the individual. So
is it a serious game then? Perhaps
it doesn't have the game. So now you need to define what makes it a game. Without defining what is a game, you can say it's simulation and learning. So
well,
it's ETS will fall in
could
there.
it still fit in this category then?
Yeah.
If you want to explicitly remove the games, could still be a training game, right? So okay. So of course, so
because they have all the interactive programs that will kind of adapt and be similar without having any game if elements.
Right.
It's you and the system trying to learn something or trying to influence. So I think when an interesting question will be, what are the characters of bad serious games?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
think about this. That's a good one. We may actually get an example. Yeah. Anyway, that's future stuff. That's good. Thank you very much. Point. But when sitting down, I was thinking about those terms in particular. So we have the accommodation of the player skill level here, right? So whatever serious games particular are, you have the asynchronous play often, right? You're not, and we're doing our best to do this. I'm streaming something here. Yeah, I think I did. So meaning there's an asynchronicity, right? So if you need to if you're working in Oslo, for example, right? So you can't actually attend. Well, you can still watch that video later. You guys can watch that video later to some extent. So we have this component, but in serious games, you can actually interact later as well. Anyone who watches the videos 2 hours later will not be able to point out, well, at least not in real time, to correct my mistakes I'm making right now, right? So, and that will not be reflected and benefit you. And of course, they are not necessarily non-sequential. They allow opportunity for choice, right? Different pathways. For example, if you have a first responder game, what do you want to be? Or do you want to be a paramedic, the driver of the ambulance, or the coordinator? I don't know, right? So, but also opportunity for failure. If things go sideways, so what? You restart the game. Of course, there's a challenge that people realize, okay, it's not super realistic, but perhaps it still serves the training benefit. That's essential there. Emergent storylines, of course, meaning you by choice, you create the game or the flow through the game, the narrative to some extent. Not the narrative, but the story in the game. And of course, we could have an opportunity of perspective taking, right? And that's something we're training in this course. That's kind of the meta program of this course. You'll be perspective training by assuming my position at least once within this course, and actually then teaching anyone else, including myself and Runa, something, right? So that's a applied approach of what's perspective taking that you can, of course, emulate in serious games. Here a bit more, of course, literature backing. We need to have this in this course. It's in the end the master's course. So as far as possible, I provide sources and so on. You can review this to some extent. But one, you mentioned that before, the opportunity about serious games is really that they can quickly provide clear learning goals, right? So clear objectives as outlined there. You guys came up with this already. The adaptiveness, providing, well, of course adaptive, but customized experiences from which individuals can learn. So we have experience-based learning, of course, meaning You do something, get feedback, and adjust. Again, this course has the component as well. Your reports are due in the mid of May, and then you have one round of experience-based learning, right? So you can fix that as well. We have continuous monitoring. Believe me, I keep an eye on you. So of the progress. So in serious games, you do that. Of course, you need to ensure, is the player engaged, for example, right? So do they commit to the game? How do they progress? Does it become too hard, right? Do you lose players, for example? This is something I think Runa will talk about implicitly in the education session. And then, of course, is the interactivity again by asking questions and possibly inquiring where allowed by the game, meaning the game needs to have a social component to do that actually. That's the idea. So, and fundamentally, of course, they bridge the different gaps between, on the one hand, learning, simulations, and games, as we talked about and we struggled with. So that's some of the key point. There's some, yeah. So here's another overview that is similar. The transformation of the learning objectives. We had this, for example. Oftentimes it accommodates the different learning styles also by using different media, right? So if you're not used to or not keen in reading too much, well, can we do the images, animations, videos, or whatever else? In games, that's a lot easier to integrate than other settings. Of course, Runa may object by suggesting we have intelligent tutoring systems that do the same thing. Again, serious games or not, discussion point. And developing a bit more like things like intuition of how you do something, developing a feeling of how you do something, not necessarily be able to explicate it explicitly then, or express it explicitly, but to get a feeling and so on. And instead of just learning by listening, which is incredibly boring, something you're doing right now, you're actually learning by doing something, right? So, and generally the expectation is that reinforcement is better in such cases, especially to develop intuitions about certain things. Okay. Good games, bad games, right? So I think this is more aimed at the education setting. But if we look at bad games, so looking at successful games, I haven't actually found characteristics for bad games more generally. Good ones are interactive, of course. They match the target audience, super important for you guys. Embedded in some sort of educational setting, educational in the wider sense. Probably I should put a learning setting now after that review. And but more importantly, I think it's those two ones. The attitude of the players. Some people just don't want to play, right? So if they see a play menu, right, so a game menu or whatever else, they're switching off. They're not interested, like managers or whatever else. They may be interested in the serious stuff, right? Whatever that means sometimes. But it's important to bear in mind, don't force serious games onto someone who doesn't want to play it, or fix your packaging, frame it in a way so it doesn't look like a game at all. That's quite very important to bear in mind. The other thing is serious games, or particular serious games, may not be always sensible in all situations, right? So if, for example, someone had a traumatic experience with something, you don't want to expose them to the same experience again necessarily, or perhaps intentionally under supervision and so on. But be sensitive about what kind of serious games you're using, because you're generally working with often working with some sort of visual effects, images, videos, and so on, and they leave us with stronger impressions than textual insights or spoken content, for example. So that's important to bear in mind. So. All right, Runa.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
To me, one of the most important factors would be alignment. The fact that what you learn is what you intended to learn. So you can learn a lot, but if what you learn is operating a 3D navigation and not the mathematics that you're supposed to learn, then I don't think it's so good anyway. So it's the alignment between what's the purpose and what is actually the outcome.
Mm-hmm. So. Two lessons here. Number one, I think we're covering that. Some is then next week. I want to talk about a bit of psychology. Number two, there's very likely to be an exam question, so bear that in mind. So, and I bet still some of you get it wrong. So, one of the main purposes, alignment of serious games. We talk about it explicitly. We dedicate time to it, but that's right. Yes, good point. But beyond the psychological aspects, this session, I want to look more at the mechanics, the underlying, the infrastructure of serious games, and then we move to the higher level concepts that underlie it. And in this slide, there are a set.
Because I mean, not to prolong the discussion, but if we go to the previous one, because I think there are two concerns about serious games. Number one, they are too much game, too little serious, or number two, they are too serious and not much game. And this is trying to address the fact that many serious games are not so fun to play. And after all, so this one is addressing that fact. But you could also say there are some serious games that are really fun to play, but you don't learn that much, which is the other weakness.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it needs to be serious, and it needs to be a game.
It needs to
this looks at, okay, if it's serious but it's not so good game, then you have these problems.
But that's the thing here, right? So it's fundamentally a mapping to the interest and background of the target audience, right? If you make a serious game for gamers, guess what? Looks different than one for managers, for agriculture experts, for collective action, modeling collective action programs or whatever else. So serious games very, very broadly. We see a totally different class of serious games later on in the course, where it's really more about awareness learning. Okay, do you guys want to have a break? 1 minute enough? No? Okay. Well, what was the convention here?
We
haven't decided that. So 1 minute evidently not. Sorry?
30 minutes.
30 minutes? That's exciting. Okay, that's the best feedback I got this week.
The time it takes to go to the cafeteria, get a cup of coffee, get back, isn't it?
So that is 2.5 minutes then? No, okay, let's say 10 minutes, I guess. Is that the deal? Yeah, can we deal with this? Or do you need 15 or 10? Let's try with 10. See how many are back. So we meet here back at 11 past 1.